Hi everyone, how's it going? My name's Andrew Wallace. I work in the sales and marketing team for J&A Mitchell Company based here in Campbelltown. J&A Mitchell's the overarching company that owns Springbank Distillers, Kilkerran and Cadenheads, our independent bottler. And today we've got Melanie. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Right. Hello, my name is Melanie and I work in the sales and marketing team for Springbank Distillers.
Excellent. Obviously what we've got here tonight is Springbank Tasting Pack online tasting. This online tasting is just for the summer 2024 tasting pack that we released in June, right at the end of June, and then the sale fell into the 1st of July as well. But we trust that everyone has now received their pack. I think a month and a half is more than enough time for all the couriers to send packs all around the world. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As we're going through the online tasting, feel free to send any comments, any questions to us. It's absolutely fine. I've got the laptop right here. I'm going to be patrolling the comments section and hitting Melanie with the hard questions. Okay.
Thank you.
So I should just say before we actually start speaking about the whiskies, there's a whole reason why we're doing these tasting packs. It's essentially, we're getting a lot of feedback from people saying it's getting harder and harder and harder to buy our whiskies nowadays. Years ago, you could rock up to the distillery shop, fill up the car with everything and anything from the distillery and then leave, go on your merry way. But nowadays it's a little bit more tricky to do that. So if you're not able to actually buy a full bottle and enjoy it, hopefully you got one of these tasting packs and you're able to sample the whiskies. If you never got the local barley from this year, hopefully you can say at least you tried this edition, or the 25 or the 12 or the Kilkerrans and the Longrow Red we've got here. So it's a pretty stellar lineup we do have for everyone, so pretty diverse, I would say, as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Really nice treat.
Without further ado, I'll stop speaking and I think it's time for Melanie to introduce the first dram.
Okay, right, so you've probably got your nice wee card, as we all do, and so basically on the card it tells us all we really need to know about the lovely whiskey that we're about to enjoy. So number one is the lovely local barley. I can't quite believe that we're starting the lineup with this lovely super local barley. For those of you who've been following us for a long time, you will know this yeast has been around for a number of years now, all different ages and all different lovely ABVs. For this particular one, you can see the lovely golden colour. We're talking about a mixture of bourbon and sherry casks. And no surprise when you hear that the breakdown is obviously the same as the lovely Springbank 10, which is 60 bourbon casks and then 40 sherry casks. Yeah,
and I think it's quite interesting because, I mean, I'm maybe skipping ahead a little bit, but between the local barley here and the 12-year-old, the local barley, 60% bourbon, as Millie said, then 40% sherry. And then the Springbank 12-year-old, you've got 70% bourbon and then 30% sherry. But the colour is so much darker in the 12-year-old, but less sherry, which sort of suggests to me refill sherry casks in here. I'll need to actually look at the vatting recipe. I need to speak to Finlay Ross, our production manager, about that. But yeah, so with the local barley 13-year-old this year, it's come from, the barley's come from Glen Craig's farm, which in my family, when we're travelling on the road up to Glasgow, it's about 5 miles outside Campbelltown. You'll be travelling on what we call the Glasgow Road, and then you look to the right and you see the Sunflower Farm, and that's Glen Craig's, and that's where we got the local barley from that particular year, 13 years ago, and it was actually Belgravia barley that we've been using for that release. Absolutely stunning.
See, this is a wee geography question, but for the Glasgow Road, can that also be called the West Road?
West Road. In my family, it's called the Glasgow Road.
Okay.
Because like that's the only place we go to from now
Okay.
when we're leaving Campbelltown.
Yeah. Yeah, no, unfortunately this year, if you're looking for any sunflowers, there are no sunflowers anyway. Last time I was there, so I don't know what the farm is doing this year. Hopefully they'll be back next year, because it is a lovely, lovely show when they're all in bloom.
Yeah. I mean, the tasting notes for this whiskey, you can taste it. It's really malty, chewy, sort of very different from standard Springbank barley, I would say personally. But the sweetness is more of like a tropical fruit, like sort of pineapple thing. And for me, I get a bit of strawberry in there, like sort of synthetic strawberry sweets. I don't get an absolutely massive punch of peat smoke. It's not the most peaty Springbank I've ever had in my life. I feel that it's more of the sort of the sea saltiness and the brininess that's coming in to this whiskey, quite frankly. And it's just so oily and thick.
And really creamy as well, you know, lovely, rich, fruity. And it's funny when you were saying about not really getting much peat smoke on it. I just a wee sip there and I was getting some peat smoke. But then again, that's lovely things. We can all agree to disagree.
There you go.
No wrong answer.
Well, I would say that the 12-year-old's a wee bit more peaty for my palate anyway. So see if I'm right or wrong, see if Melanie's right or wrong. It's your choice. But yeah, I should say as well, there's a reason why we charge £100 for this 13-year-old bottle of whiskey. It's getting up there in price. It is a little bit more expensive than the standard Springbank, but basically it's not very cost effective to be producing local barley on the regular. It's essentially an absolute nightmare to work with. Production staff always joke that they're going to take their holidays when local barley production's in the schedule. And if you can imagine, the standard barley that we get is from a company called Highland Grain Limited. And that's a conglomeration of farms up in the northeast of Scotland. When we buy, it's 28 tonnes of unmalted barley that arrives, and it's the approved distilling variety of that year, and we have to follow the industry because Highland Grain follow the industry. After all is said and done, we get about 400 litres per tonne of new make spirit from the barley, which I'd say is absolutely fantastic considering we do absolutely everything so old-fashioned and traditional, and basically all the pieces of equipment around the distillery. It is like a working museum. It's not the most modern, it's not the most high-tech distillery. So 400 litres of new make spirit per tonne is pretty good. But when we're distilling local barley, in a good year, Finlay Ross has said we've lost 15 litres out of that 400. So you're down to 385 right there. And in a bad year, we've lost about 85 litres out of that 400. So you're down to about 315 litres per tonne. And if there was a distillery manager producing about 315 litres per tonne out of barley at a massive distillery that was trying to go for all the yields and trying to cut costs and make it as profitable as possible, I don't think they'd be in a job for too long. But the whole thing is about quality, it's about traceability, it's about producing something that is different from what we normally make, and also keeping the money within Campbelltown. Because I think if we pay Highland Grain Limited for their barley, the Campbelltown community doesn't really benefit from that. Like the money doesn't stay within the community. But when we go to a local farmer and we pay for whatever type of barley we've asked that farmer to grow that particular year, then that's keeping the money in Campbelltown, or in the local area rather. They're funding their business, hopefully employing more people on the farm. They're maybe buying local produce from the shop to feed their family. They're maybe going to the pub, restaurant, hotels. They're maybe buying a few bottles of whiskey from the shop as well. So yeah, I think that's what we're all about, keeping people in a job and stimulating Campbelltown's economy, and also producing fantastic whiskey, because You taste the difference, I would say.
I think as well it's quite important to stress like the word local, because it's always relative, whereas here it does actually mean for this particular barley it's been grown within about 500 metres of the sign that welcomes you to Campbelltown. And even for, I think, for the other farms that have been used, we're not talking more than like 5 kilometres from the town, which is really pretty unique. I mean, a few years ago I was lucky enough to go down to Sound of Kintyre to see barley growing there, and I mean, what was lovely was when you were standing there in the barley field, you could just hear the waves coming crashing in on Westport and just along the beach from there. And after I tasted that barley, once it had been distilled, you sort of imagine that you could taste the lovely saltiness and cereal notes coming through. And I mean, that's one thing about the lovely area of Kintyre is you can, because we're just such a long, narrow peninsula, wherever you are, you're never too far from the sea, and you definitely get that influence in the whiskies.
Yeah, 100%. And there's another picture that I asked Nathan to bring up of the barley sitting in the loft. This is basically a picture that I took back in February time when I did March time when I did my whiskey school week. And that is about, I don't know how many tons of barley is actually sitting there. I think it's Westminster that we had requested to be harvested by the farmer, delivered to us in about September time last year, and then it sits in the barley loft. Actually, sorry, it's harvested in September time. It's dried and delivered to us in about October, November time, and then it might sit there in what we call dormancy for about 5-6 months, and then it's laid on the malting floors, and you'll see another picture of the malting floors that Nathan's going to bring up. It's going to be malted in about April time, and then we start distilling local barley around about the May Malts Festival every single year. It's probably after the May Malts Festival, so creeping into June slightly, as I've been told. And traditionally we do about around 25 tons of local barley, which is like a couple mashes worth. But this year we've done 55 tons of Westminster barley. So in a good 10 to 15 years, it might be double the amount of local barley on the shelf, but who knows?
You should be careful what you say. You might be held to account for that.
Yeah.
As well, I just want to say thank you very much to all the local farmers who do actually, grow some lovely local barley for us. Because in the climate on the west coast of Scotland, it is not the best. I mean, traditionally, Scottish barley comes from the northeast because it's a lot drier and sunnier, and the barley doesn't like the humidity or the rain. And this year has been a particular struggle with the high rainfall we've had, and the late planting because of all the heavy rain, making it difficult to plough the fields in preparation for sowing the barley. But I'm delighted to say I was just down in Southend last night, and there are some lovely fields of barley, which are eventually, when I was down last month, they were quite green, but now it's all a lovely, dark, deep, rich golden colour. So hopefully it won't be too long.
I think there's a song about that.
Is that showing my age?
But yeah, I think it's probably best to move on to the next whiskey. We don't want to keep you here all night. So we'll move on to your second whiskey in the tasting pack. This is Springbank 12-year-old cask strength. And this year we're going for 70% bourbon cask, 30% sherry cask. As I alluded to earlier in the evening, I'd imagine there's a lot more fresh sherry cask used in the vatting. It's a little bit darker of a colour. When I tasted this, I actually used this on my society tasting tour back in February, so I've had a lot of experience with this whiskey. I found it a lot more peaty than the local barley. It's definitely a little bit more sort of rich in terms of like caramelized brown sugar, sort of thick golden syrup, very, very sweet, very oily and waxy again. But yeah, just an absolutely beautiful Springbank 12-year-old. and it's a staple from the distillery. One of my favourite releases that we do.
Mm-hmm. I think the lovely thing about this series is that it's always the same age, but the ABV is always changing, and the makeup is always changing as well. For those of you who've followed this, it's probably been out for about 12 years now, the 12-year-old cask strength, and to begin with, it was sort of quite a rocky road. It took a while to take off. And then luckily for us, over in Asia, number 12 is a lucky number. And so there everybody was very keen to buy a bottle of 12-year-old over even a 10 or a 15. And so that really got some momentum behind it. And so there have sort of been a few wee breaks in production. So there was 1 year, I think not so long ago, when folk were panicking because, as you'll know, our financial year starts in August, which is just obviously coming up for harvest time. But one of our financial years, the Springbank 12-year-old, was right at the very start of the year. And then the following year, it wasn't till the very end of the year. So it was almost a 2-year break.
Oh, wow.
So I think there were lots of people who were really, really concerned that this had been tweaked a bit. But last year we just had 1 release, but I'm delighted to say that this year we're going to have back to 2 releases. So that'll make a lot of people very happy, because it is a really sought after whisky, because folk love the fact it's, again, summer maturation to our sort of 10, the local barley for this year, but also just the ABV is changing too.
Yeah, and what was interesting was I was speaking to David in the office, and he was talking about how the recipe is going to be the same for the 2 different batches of the 12-year-old. One will obviously be a higher ABV, and then however many months later it'll be the same recipe, but obviously a lower ABV, just bottled slightly later in the year. So very interesting anyway.
Right.
But yeah, I think I wanted to touch on Springbank as a whole. Basically, I don't know how many people are on here and how introduced they are to our distillery, but Springbank Distillery was founded in 1828 in Campbelltown. Campbelltown's on the west of Scotland. We're here tonight in Campbelltown, right next to the distillery. We're in the media room right above the label guy. We call him Label Guy. Label Guy's office. And yeah, so Springbank Distillery is probably one of the oldest sort of independently run distilleries left in Scotland. We do everything the old-fashioned way at this distillery. It's basically every single part of the whiskey making process is done on site by as many hands as possible, employing local people. Every part of the whiskey making process, from malting the barley, mashing, fermentation, distilling, filling casks, maturation, and actually bottling on site as well, which is very unique in the Scottish whisky industry. A lot of people will buy in pre-malted barley, or they might have malt floors, but it might be 10% of production, 20% production. The malt floors for Springbank, Hazelburn, and Longrow is 100% of the barley is malted on our malt floors and then used in the mashing and distillation. A lot of companies will ship off casks to the mainland, or like the central belt of Scotland, for maturation. We have 8 warehouses in Campbelltown, storing upwards of 22,500 casks on site, and then a bottling plant as well. And the whole philosophy was basically, Mr. Wright was our chairman, who unfortunately passed away last August, actually a year ago now. He had taken over the distillery in the 1960s from his father, and Mr. Wright is part of the line of the Mitchells. He's a relation to the original illicit distiller Archibald Mitchell, who built an illicit distillery on this site, and then it was legalised in 1828 by John and William. Mr. Wright was the person that brought in this philosophy of doing it the old-fashioned way, keeping people in jobs, and hopefully you can taste it in the glass. We feel it's a little bit more authentic for people anyway. So, Slange.
And I always think you can definitely, with all the lovely oiliness, how it coats the glass, You know, to me, you don't get that in all whiskies, but I'd say all ours, they're always, yeah, lovely and oily, lovely and creamy, and really coat the glass and you can just see it slip down.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning. Nathan, can you put up the picture of the stills? So I just want to show everyone right here, this is the still house at Springbank, and we've got 3 different copper stills on site. So you can see that the one on the very left is the wash still, and it's got the sort of yellow brickwork underneath. That's because it's a direct fired wash still. And actually there's steam coils inside the wash still, but it's also direct fired. But the other stills are steam coils only. There's a reason why we do this. Basically, when you have a direct flame underneath the still, boiling up the liquid inside, you create what's like a sort of charring or a crust on the very inside. And that actually has to be scraped off by what's called a rummager. And it's connected to a little turning arm that's connected to a bell. And when you go into the still house, you can hear the bell turning. But yeah, I always explain it. It's basically, I'm a terrible chef. But so if I am cooking a pasta sauce or a curry or something like that, and I leave the pan on the heat for too long, it might create a little bit of a crust underneath. But in some dishes, you're looking for that because it's creating more caramelization, more deeper, full-bodied flavors. And that's exactly what's happening on the inside of the still. And all of these extra flavors are getting boiled up. The alcohol vapor is rising through the neck, through the line arm. And you can see the line arms at Springbank is what's connecting the copper still to the, you can't see them, but they're through the wall on the outside of the building. There's condensers on the backside, on the outside. The line arms are slightly angled downwards, and that's to let the heavy alcohol vapors sort of escape a little bit easier into the condenser. You're creating a bit more of an oily, full-bodied, slightly heavy style of old style of whiskey. And then as well, I want to talk about the condensers at Springbank. We use a combination of shell and tube condensers, and then worm tub condenser, or one worm tub condenser as well. So the shell and tubes are very modern. There's a lot of copper to spirit contact. It creates a bit of a lighter style of spirit. But the worm tub is basically a big giant tank running with water, and there's copper pipes spiraling downwards, and it turns the spirit or the heavy alcohol vapors back into spirit very easily. And they say because there's less copper to vapor to spirit contact, creates a much more heavy, robust, oily style of whiskey. So it's very interesting. We're sort of using very modern styles of distilling equipment, very old-fashioned styles of distilling equipment, and again, hopefully you can taste it in the glass here tonight. So thanks. Maybe it's best to move on to the next whiskey, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a nice wee chat about the first 2. So for number 3, we're going to one of the oldest whiskies that we produce, and this is the lovely 25-year-old, which can be a real challenge to find because it is so limited. I think in times past it's maybe sold out within half an hour in the distillery shop. So if you're wanting to get a 25-year-old, it is definitely you're going to be one of these people who enjoys the whole experience of waiting outside overnight in the queue. So this year's Springbank 25-year-old is again back to sherry and bourbon casks for the maturation, but again slightly different number division. So we're talking about 65% sherry casks and 35% bourbon casks. And I think obviously when we always look at the colour in our glasses, actually I'd say that one definitely looks markedly, looks darker.
Spilling that, it's 25-year-old.
It is. It looks very dark in the glass, whereas on the bottle here, it is super dark. And again, that's all lovely natural colour, no caramel adding at all. It's really just come out the cask and then the water's been added to dilute it down.
Yeah. Remember doing tasting notes in the office, tasting this for the first time and just thinking, wow, this is extremely earthy, dirty, dusty. It's an absolutely beautiful dram. It's so complex. I would say there's a hint of peat smoke, but over the 25 years, it's sort of dissipated. From there, I get like cherries, a bit of walnuts, maybe even for some reason into the finish it changes for me. I get like a sort of like a herby note, like a herbaceous, like tarragon or something like that. And it's super savory, meaty, like a sort of deli cured sweet meat, I would say. But yeah, I absolutely love this dram. Spent 25 years in a cask for Melanie to pour it on the table right there. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend. Sometimes you say about adding water, but yeah, definitely no need for water in this one.
But yeah, and I've got a picture to show you of the warehouses. So Nathan's going to pull that up in a wee second. But when speaking about the sort of earth and dirt, damp, dusty sort of quality of the whiskey, this is one of the reasons why right here we can see this is warehouse number 3 on site at the distillery. Basically we have 5 of this style of warehouse that's on the screen right now. It's called a dunnage warehouse. It's basically the casks are racked a total of 3 high. They're on earth floors. Essentially, and then we've got 3 other taller racked warehouses that can go 6 or 7 high in the casks, and they're actually concrete floors. But I feel a lot of the flavour, well, when you're maturing whiskey on the west coast of Scotland, you might lose about 1.5 to 2% of the volume inside the cask, and over the years, let's just say 10 years have passed, you've lost about 15%, 20% of the volume inside the cask. What's been replaced in there is the air, it's the atmosphere that's been imparted onto the whiskey, and all the flavours in the air, I would say as well. I mean, when you walk into warehouse number 3 at Springbank, it's a big waft of earthiness, of dirtiness, of damp, sort of mustiness. And then also, we are less than like a mile away from the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of these sea salty flavours are in the air, are in the atmosphere down here, and I would highly suggest that all of these flavours are being imparted onto the whiskey over the so many years that they're being matured in Campbelltown.
I mean, you just think, I mean, one of their houses is probably only about 500 metres away from Campbelltown Loch.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that distance from the Atlantic, but then you've got a lovely sea loch even closer. And I think before they sort of sorted out the flooding here, I think quite often Longrow, which is very close to where some of the warehouses are, was regularly flooded. So the sea got even a wee bit too close.
Yeah. I see one of the first questions. I might have missed some others. Sorry, I'm looking at the laptop sort of intermittently. Ricky talks about the society. Do we know roughly how many members there are currently, and any idea of how many active, quote unquote, active members there are? So in around 2020, we decided to shut off new membership for the society, because it hit a point of around 4,000 members. And we, at that point in time, we were doing like single casks back in the day, or small batches. Now, how many bottles are you getting from a single cask or a small batch? Like 200 bottles from a barrel, 300, maybe 500 bottles from a butt, if you're lucky. And then a small batch, 1,000, 1,500 bottles. And 4,000 people all want a bottle. So it was just getting to a point where it was basically, we had too many members and not enough supply of whiskey. And it was decided, let's shut things off and reevaluate later down the road and see what we're going to do. And then 4 years has passed. So we are in constant contact, or we're in constant conversation rather, about what to actually do with the society moving forward. So a couple different trains of thought, reopening it, bringing in the new Springbank fan, the loyal fan that is the drinker that wants to enjoy the product, that's not just there to buy bottles and put it on auction sites straight away? Or do we do something different with it and maybe limit it and even further and just bring in the drinker that can prove that they're opening bottles? So it's a bit of a toss-up. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen, but stay tuned, and maybe over the next couple of years or so we'll figure out what's going to happen with the society. 4,000 members in there.
I'd say, I mean, if you are fortunate enough to have joined before the doors closed, I would just enjoy it. You're one of the very, very lucky people indeed.
You had the foresight.
Yeah. And just say as well, for the Springbank 25-year-old, in the next year, we're actually going to be changing the age of this slightly, and we're going to be releasing a new product called a vintage, and it's going to be a 1998 vintage. So for the next few years, you won't be able to get a 25-year-old, but you will be able to buy and taste whiskey that is actually older than 25-year-old. And so we're going to be saying vintage, and then the year it was that the whiskey was distilled in. Yeah. So still an old whiskey, but just rather than giving you the age, giving you the year of distillation. Yeah,
because I think there's old stories of Springbank bottlings that might have said 21 years old on the bottle, but the whiskey was a bit closer to like 30 years old in the bottle. So with this vintage series, I think after speaking to Ranald as well, or you spoke to Ranald, it's basically if we write the year 1998 vintage, it's all casks from that year and all the same age statement as well. So that release will be next year at some point, I want to say, or is it this year? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
We'll keep you updated anyway when it's released. But it'll be 26 years old, 1998, 20% fresh sherry, 80% refill sherry, Springbank, bottled at cask strength as well. And funnily enough, it's going to be the same price as a 25-year-old. So getting more bang for your buck anyway. And hopefully that's a good replacement for the 25-year-old series anyway. So
yeah. I mean, the good news is that there is older whiskey there, which I'm sure everybody is delighted at.
Sort of reliving or reviving an old series. We did the vintages back in 2010s, early 2000s, didn't we? Yeah. Exactly. Okay, guys. So probably a good time to move on to the next whiskey. Let's move on to the Kilkerran 8-year-old sherry. So with the tasting pack tonight, or the last tasting pack we did in January time, and we did the online tasting in February, that was all whiskies from the one distillery, Springbank, as far as I can remember. But in this tasting pack, slightly different. We've thrown in a couple Kilkerrans, but no Hazelburn, because a bit of a limit of Hazelburn stock this year. So the very first one that we've got, the Kilkerran 8-year-old sherry, this was released in February of this year, along with the 25-year-old back on that release. And the 8-year-old sherry was bottled at 57.4%. It's 100% Oloroso sherry casks going on in the vatting. But after speaking to Finlay Ross, there were 85% fresh Oloroso sherry casks, then 15% refill Oloroso sherry casks. So although we do, the majority of the years we've done Kilkerran 8-year-old sherry, it'll play around with what percentage of fresh casks we use to refill casks for every single release. And what's actually quite interesting is years gone by, we've done two different batches or two different releases of the 8-year-old series for Kilkerran each year. So last year there was a sherry and then a bourbon, and then the year before that there was a port and then a sherry. But this year, just the Kilkerran 8-year-old sherry. But I can tell you there was about 2,500 extra bottles of this bottled up because we didn't have a second batch available for you to try.
I mean, I love this for the nose on it. It just sort of reminds me of being by the seaside and having all the ropes and your lobster creels, and that sort of almost like prawn crackers, types of crisps, sort of prawn cocktail, etc. Definitely that sort of maritime note coming through, but also just sort of the tar, the sea tar as well, and the ropes.
I would totally agree. It's a typical Campbelltown style of dram. Heavy on the sea salty, coastal influence, bit of peat smoke in there, big sherry cask as well. But the sweetness for me is more like a sort of cola syrup. I get like deep stewed fruits, a bit of red berries in here. Sort of Christmas cake in a glass style of whiskey. It's absolutely gorgeous. And the cask strength as well, it's really just showing off what Kilkerran can do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do feel that Kilkerran gets overlooked when it comes to Springbank because it's our sister distillery, but when it's producing whiskies like this, it's absolutely fantastic. And we're showing off what it can do in the bottle for you.
And I don't think it doesn't do any harm to sort of, say again that, the barley for Kilkerran, apart from the heavily peated, is all malted on the traditional floor malting at Springbank. And as I'm sure you know as well, it's the same production team who work 9 months of the year at Springbank Distillery and then the other 3 months of the year at Glengyle Distillery. And for those of you who visited both distilleries, you'll see it's very, very different jobs for the guys when they're there. Springbank, super active, up and down ladders, pulling on ropes, twisting valves. Whereas when you get up to Glengyle, there are some comfy leather seats, and you can actually press some buttons, and with the power of electricity, they'll actually help you and the equipment work together, rather than sort of needing more of a helping hand as well.
I've heard it being described as going for a holiday up to Kilkerran.
Yeah.
But also think it's quite important to talk about sort of the plans for the future with Kilkerran and Glengyle Distillery in general and Springbank. As Melanie alluded to there, 9 months of production at Springbank and then 3 months up at our sister distillery Glengyle that produces Kilkerran single malt. So from January all the way up to like mid-September, we're making Springbank, Hazelburn and Longrow, and then producing Kilkerran for about 12 weeks of the year from about October time up to the end of December. 8 weeks will be that lightly peated barley. 3 weeks will be of heavily peated that's purchased in from Baird's, and then 1 week will be unpeated that's also purchased in from Baird's. The unpeated, you'll taste a lot of that in Campbelltown Lock, makes up about 60% of the recipe. The darker batches of Campbelltown Lock that you've probably seen for the last few years. So not absolutely everything that we distill on site is actually malted on site. It's a very, very small proportion, like 3 weeks of heavily peated Kilkerran, 1 week of unpeated Kilkerran is the barley's purchased in pre-malted from Baird's. Everything else that we do is malted at Springbank, kilned, and then either distilled at the Springbank distillery or taken up by a trailer, a 6-ton load trailer up the 300 yards to the other distillery.
A very normal tractor trailer, nothing fancy.
But yeah, the reason why I'm mentioning this is basically because right now at the Glengyle distillery, we have the original malt floors. They're there, but right now they're storing tables, paintings, chairs. There's basically a storage unit right now because there was an investigation done a number of years ago, and basically if we put 10 tons of barley on each of those floors, of the malt floors, they would just crash straight through. So there's a bit of a debate what we're going to do. Are we going to build a drum maltings where we could just flick a switch and produce all the malted barley that we would like for the Kilkerran distillery or the Kilkerran single malt, or do we reinforce the floors, reopen the malt floors, employ people to do that, and have both malt floors operating, one at Springbank and then one at Glengyle distillery. We're just trying to figure out what's the best way moving forward, because if we free up malted barley production at Springbank. If we don't have to produce Kilkerran down at Springbank, that frees up more time to start producing more Springbank malted barley, more Hazelburn malted barley, more Longrow malted barley, and maybe we could get to a point of operating Springbank distillery for the entire year round. And then if we have a source of barley, malted barley for Kilkerran, then we can start up in production there. But I think it was Mr. Wright's sort of philosophy where he loved what's called the just-in-time business model, where you're just creating enough supply, or you're just creating enough whiskey to supply the demand and then progress from there. We never wanted to produce millions and millions and millions of litres of alcohol and then hopefully people buy it later down the road. It was about going slow and then building up as the supply or the demand increases rather. So I can tell you we have started increasing production at both distilleries. Springbank before 2018 used to be like 120,000 litres of alcohol per annum. And then Glengyle Distillery used to be 45,000 litres per annum. Now we've basically doubled at both distilleries. Springbank is now producing about 260,000 litres, and we're on course to do that again this year. And then Glengyle, our sister distillery, is on course, well, it will be on course when it's actually in operation in October time, to produce about 92,000 litres of alcohol. So that's the annoying thing about whiskey. You've got to put it in a cask and let it mature for so many years, but the product's pretty good at the end.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing about Mr. Wright was, when you think one of the issues with so many new distilleries opening up is obviously cash flow, because you do have to wait the 3 years minimum. And I think what was so unusual about the Kilkerran was that obviously it was 12 years before the first sort of regular release was bottled. And so again, that sort of shows confidence, but also not necessarily what you would learn at business school if you were setting up a distillery.
There you go. Right, time to move on to the next whiskey. Yeah.
So we're staying with Kilkerran because, as you know, we haven't just got one product anymore. We've got a nice wee selection coming up. And so, no surprise, we're heading towards the heavily peated now, towards the end of the tasting. And so this is for batch 10. And so that tells us that roughly with 2 batches a year, this has been going for about 5 years now. And the barley for the heavily peated had a bit of a checkered career. Because there were attempts to begin with to malt it in-house, but unfortunately we just couldn't get the peat level that we were looking for. So it was then bought in, and then the guys decided of another go, and they absolutely hit the nail on the head and started getting a really, really high ppm, whereas this is about, I think I'm right in saying that was sort of the first few batches, wasn't it, were the really, really high ppm, and then after that it's gone down to about 40 ppm for the peat level. I always say though, don't be put off with the heavily peated brand on it, because it's all, again, relative. So we're talking about a Campbelltown heavy peat. So for me, it's more like a nice sort of smoky creme brulee. Because as you can see with the colour, no surprise, most of it is mainly matured in bourbon casks, and so you're getting lots of the vanilla, the creme brulee, vanilla custard creams, all that coming through. But then, because it's quite a young whisky as well, and although there's no age on it, I can tell you it's about 5 years old, you have got a lot more peat coming through than you would obviously in the Kilkerran 12-year-olds. Because the Angels don't just take their share of alcohol, they also take their share of peat smoke as well. Yeah.
What Melanie was talking about there was there's a non-age statement on the bottle. It's non-age statement. There's no age there. It's because we use many different years of casks, many different ages of casks in the vatting for each release. So I was checking. This vatting recipe for this batch 10 is basically casks from 2015, that first ever distillation run. Cast from, actually it skips a year, 2017, 2018, 2019. And basically the thing is, if we have to put an age statement on there, it would have to be the youngest whiskey. There's actually cast from 2015 mixed with those other years up to 2019. And yeah, you might have noticed something on the last couple of batches of Kilkerran. On the front of the label, they say small batch, and it's in red, in the red circle at the bottom. But batch 1 through 8, they used to say peat in progress. And that was a sort of, I'm going to say homage back, but that sounds very fancy. That's sort of keeping in mind with the old work in progress series of Kilkerran. When we first started producing Kilkerran and put it out there, we called it the work in progress series, and we wanted to harken back to that with the peat in progress series. So batch 1 through 8 would have had the circle, but it would have had black text, and it would have said peat in progress. Then batch 9 and 10 have moved on to small batch. There's a reason for this. It's basically because peat in progress, we were playing around with the ages of casks. We were playing around with the vatting recipe. One of the batches was like 75% bourbon, 25% sherry. Another one was 85% bourbon, 15% sherry. But with the batch 9 and batch 10, we sort of feel that we have, don't want to say perfected the recipe, but we've come up with the recipe that we're going to stick with, cask depending, moving forward anyway. And that's 90% bourbon, 10% sherry. Again, that's if the cask in the warehouse dictate that anyway. Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
So I'm sure as well some of you will have been at the Kilkerran weekend. And so I feel that we do have to mention the 20th anniversary of Kilkerran that we've been busy celebrating. And so yes, it was a wonderful weekend in July, and we had lots of supporters of Kilkerran from the very beginning, importers, retailers. We had a lovely meal. Everybody got put on their glad rags and went to the Victoria Hall, which wasn't like the Victoria Hall. It was looking very, very smart. And a perfect venue for a delicious dinner. And then on the Saturday in the evening, there was a superb concert with the local band Fling, and then the Red Hot Chili Pipers.
Not the Peppers, no.
No. No. And then at the end of the evening, Travis performed. So it was a really unforgettable night for everybody. So great celebration.
That's just one of the sort of things that we've done in celebration of Kilkerran this year, as Melanie alluded to. 20th anniversary of the Glengyle distillery. First started producing spirit in March 25th, 2004. So once March 25th, 2024 hit, we started doing a bunch of different things. We released cage bottle Kilkerrans in the distillery shop. They're single cask strength versions of Kilkerran. That historically it's been Springbank, Hazelburn, Longrow. Cameron McGeachy says there was 2 Kilkerrans that he saw in the cage one time when he was working there, but there was no continual release of Kilkerran cage bottles. And then it was just talked about in the office saying, why don't we do Kilkerran cage bottles? No reason. So we decided to add that in for the 20th anniversary. We also cracked open one of the first 6-pack flights in the white box. The 10-year-old sets. The 10-year-old sets, yeah, for people to come and taste. From there, we started at May time, in the May Malts Festival, we unveiled the new lineup for the Kilkerran warehouse tastings on the Friday. And actually, the whole of the Friday was just dedicated to Kilkerran. Traditionally, it's been Kilkerran and Carron Heads, a lot of Kilkerran tastings throughout the day. Then the warehouse tasting was a brand new lineup of casks. And then from the next Monday onwards, Kilkerran warehouse tastings were part of the tour package, the tour offer that anyone, if they come to Campbelltown, can come and do a Kilkerran warehouse tasting, 3:30 p.m. Monday through Saturday. And it's basically someone from the team here will take you from the Springbank Distillery shop lead you through the courtyard, take you into one of the warehouses, show you 6 individual casks of Kilkerran, different ages, different years, different ABVs, different cask types. There's a triple distilled in there as well, so not even standard distillations. And then you basically taste from the Valinch into your glass, taste the whiskey, see what you like about it. If you do like a bottle, you're more than welcome to purchase a 35cl in the Springbank Distillery shop afterwards. So it's a case of, we understand it's very hard to get to Campbelltown. We understand it's a long way from Glasgow, about 3 hours west of Campbelltown, down very long and windy roads, as a certain singer used to call it. But so we want to reward you and give you reasons to come to Campbelltown, i.e. caged bottles that are well priced, I would say, different tour offerings, and a whole other host of things as well. And what Melanie was talking about, the Kilkerran 20th anniversary sort of celebratory weekend, it was basically to reward all of the people that have built Kilkerran over the past 20 years, i.e. importers, retailers, other businesses that have helped us, and then our staff as well, and give back to everyone. So we wanted to have a big party in Campbelltown, and we certainly did have a big party. And I think someone, Ash Borland, off subject, however, Travis 26, what are your thoughts and pricing? So yes, I thought we were going to get this question today at some point. I was wondering whether to bring it up. I think it is it's a good thing to chat about. It's basically, we wanted to have this big celebration in Campbelltown, and we wanted to invite a headline sort of artist band to come down and perform for all of our staff and have a big concert in Campbelltown. And we got chatting to a company called Cascade, and they've done bottlings with other bands in the past. I know they've got a Deacon Blue bottling that they did a couple of years ago or so. They gave us a short list of bands that may be interested in sort of working with us and doing a bottling or doing a concert or whatever. We got that short list and reached out to one of the biggest names on the list. That was Travis. They're a very famous indie/rock band from Scotland. So we got in contact with them, and we quickly realised that they knew about Springbank, maybe not so much about Kilkerran. And in the negotiations about potentially having them travel and do an hour-long gig, they wanted to explore the possibility of bottling a Springbank, and we were more than happy. It's not something we normally do, to be honest, but this was too good an opportunity to pass up, getting those guys down and doing a sort of collaboration with them. So David and Ranald brought up a scatter of samples and met with Doogie, the bass player up in Glasgow, and they sampled everything, went through all the different bottles, and they all came to the same agreement that this 26-year-old refill bourbon single cask that would eventually be bottled at cask strength was the one. And it was £1,250. It's now sold out. That's not a cheap price for a bottle of whiskey. Granted, I mean, our 25-year-old on right here is £500, and then we've got this one for £1,250. But it's a special, one-off, never to be repeated bottle of Springbank. And I mean, you can start comparing what single casks of Springbank go on the open market for by independent bottlers as well. You're creeping upwards of £800, £1,000 sometime, but they don't have a special label with Travis with their brand new LA Times album artwork on the front, and to commemorate our 20th anniversary at Kilkerran as well. So I think the price justifies itself, to be honest, and we were more than happy to charge that and have a big celebration in Campbelltown for the staff and everyone involved. So there you go. Probably time to move on to the last whiskey. That is Longrow Red over here. Longrow Red, this one was basically released in June. Spent the first 4 years in refill bourbon, and then the final 3 years in fresh Pinot Noir. And I know Melanie's got a bit of a say in these casks. I think there's a story there. But these casks are from a vineyard called Domaine Florent Garaudet. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
How's the pronunciation?
Yeah, no, not bad.
Melanie speaks French.
Better than mine. So I was over in France for a tasting tour, and I ended up in the lovely town of Beaune, right in the heart of Burgundy. And at the end of the tasting, a guy came up and said, I'm a small scale wine producer. I would love to, send over some casks. And so when I returned to Campbelltown, I had a chat with Finlay to say, look, would you be interested? And so there sort of had to be a minimum number of casks. So it took a couple of years, but we did eventually get the minimum number of casks to come over. And I'm delighted to say they were used for the maturation of this recent Longrow Red. The French are absolutely delighted because previous Pinot Noir have all been from New Zealand, which, as you know, is a bit of rivalry between Pinot Noir from the Southern Hemisphere and then Pinot Noir from the Northern Hemisphere. So I'm looking forward to going to the show in Paris in September and actually being able to offer the French retailers and customers an actual Longrow Red that has been matured in Pinot Noir casks. Yeah. And I know that Andrew has put on a really nice photo of the casks just to sort of show how traditional the production is and how small scale it is in this part of Burgundy. Is that you can see on the casks themselves, you haven't just got the metal hoops, but you actually have hoops made of willow. And that's because of all the sort of wee beasties that you can get that can attack the casks. What they do is to protect the cask, they let the beasties eat, have dinner on the willow hoops. And so it was the first time I'd actually seen that. And that was just, these casks had just been emptied actually for the bottling of the Longrow Red. And they were just sitting in the yard outside. So for me, that's one of the really sort of perks, joys of this job, is that you can just be walking around the distillery and it's always worthwhile having a wee bit of a nosy and sort of snapping away and thinking, I like that photo, I don't know when I'll use it, but I'm sure it'll be handy. And that was one of the few days at the beginning of June when there wasn't any rain, so it was actually a nice dry picture.
We didn't get much of a summer this year, did we?
No, we did not.
But yeah, I mean, the tasting notes for this one, this is so meaty, boisterous sort of style of Longrow Red, very savoury. The sweetness is undeniably sort of like red berries, black currants, brambles, red currants in here as well. The peat smokes, I often find with Longrow, you don't really know what kind of peat smoke's going to appear in the glass. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be that sea salty, briny style where you get the fish and creels and all of that? Mm. Or is it going to be what I think this one is more mainland, heathered, vegetal style of peat smoke, where it's more like a campfire, it's more like a bonfire, as opposed to the like a fishing boat.
I mean, there is definitely the peat smoke in it. I mean, I think for the difficulty with Longrow is that, as Andrew said, you never really know what you're going to get. So, I mean, like a few years ago, we had like Longrow 21-year-old, Longrow 23-year-old, and I think we were all really pretty surprised at the level of peat smoke in them, because you'd expect, to be that age to really be very, very mild in peat smoke. And again, that's just the lovely sort of surprise about these whiskies, is you don't actually know what you're going to get until they're actually drawing the samples for the bottling. And but no, this one, I mean, it's 7 years old, but it's got a lovely peat aspect to it. Sweet berry jam, almost like a fruit jelly as well, with a smokiness coming through.
I see a question from Rachel Marsh. Out of interest, what was the reason behind, the decision not to include a Hazelburn in the pack? It's a fair point. Why isn't there a Hazelburn here? It's essentially, we're going to be doing these tasting packs every second release moving forward. So the first one, which was released in like January time of this year, was the 2 previous releases. And it just so happened there was the Hazelburn Sherrywood series in one of those 2 releases. I think it was...
You caught it the second one, November time.
November time, yeah. So it would have been the August 2023 and then November 2023 release. And as Melanie said, there was a Hazelburn 15 on there. But then this tasting pack that you can see in front of you, that you're tasting tonight, that basically it didn't have any Hazelburn or limited edition Hazelburns. I think there might be some stock issues with even the standard 10-year-old Hazelburn, if Melanie would speak about that.
Yeah, for the coming year, unfortunately, there's just going to be one Hazelburn release, and so it's still going to be a lovely Hazelburn sherry that will be coming out. So unfortunately, there's just going to be a wee pause on the Hazelburn 10-year-old. So there won't be the 100% bourbon maturation available anyway. But I think it's probably quite a good time as well to talk about the changes to Longrow Red.
Yeah.
And so Longrow Red, this is unfortunately the last release, and so it's going to be replaced with a Longrow 100 proof, which will still have, for the coming one anyway, a red wine maturation. But it's going to be bottled at 100 proof, or for the UK version, about 57% ABV. And so again, it's just a case of having to look at stocks, and just unfortunately, we're having less of the older whiskies in the Longrow style, and so that's why we're coming down to Longrow 100 proof, which isn't going to have an age on it. But also as well, not tying it into the red, it's just giving us more flexibility on the cask makeup as well. Because obviously, as you know, the production's so small, so it's the quality that counts, that allows us to manage that for the future.
I think as well, we've done 12 different editions of Longrow Red over so many years. We've done red wine casks from many, many different countries, many different types of red wine casks, and we felt it had a good run. There were plans we're looking into the possibility of having a sort of more, like a core product of Longrow Red. It wouldn't be a yearly release, but it might have been alongside the Longrow Peated. Might have been a non-aged statement, a blend of different Longrow Red casks. And then one day, basically I asked David and Ranald to come into the office and help me help me is a hard task, but we wanted to sample the Longrow Red 6-year-old refill Pinot Noir that would have been the next in the series. And because I was using that on my society tour I'm doing around Europe, and I'd shipped all of the bottles of Longrow Red 6-year-old refill Pinot Noir to every different market, had all the tasting mats all ready, and then I said, right, I want to actually taste these before I go and start speaking about this whiskey all around Europe. So we're in the office, we cracked out the bottle. It was very light in colour. It looked not so dissimilar to that. A lot lighter than the fresh Pinot Noir release that we did in June. And then when we actually tasted it, it was heavily bourbon cast. It was hardly any of the sort of typical red wine sweetness. This was the old New Zealand Pinot Noir that we'd basically done the Longrow bottling of, and then we filled spirit back into those casks, used them a second time. But yeah, a lot less of the red wine influence in there. And it was a case of sort of managing customer or consumer expectations. If someone buys a Longrow Red and it looks like a bourbon cask, it looks very light, and then they actually taste it and it tastes more like a bourbon cask whiskey and there's not much of the red wine influence, then they might have been missold, or they might have felt a little bit hard done by. So in an effort to sort of manage that expectation, we're releasing the 100 proof series, and that just gives us so much more flexibility in the future, because we can start playing around with the different cask types. because we fill Longrow Spirit into sherry casks, bourbon casks, Madeira, red wine obviously, but we've got white wine casks that we filled this year of Longrow, a bunch of different things, all your different ports and rums as well. So in the future, well, the next edition, which would have been the 6-year-old refill Pinot Noir, it's going to be called Longrow 100 Proof Non-Age Statement, as Melanie mentioned. But subsequent batches from there, we can start playing around with the different casks in the makeup, full maturation bourbons, maybe some sherry, maybe a mixture of both, different cask types, and let Finlay Ross work his magic. Anyway, so that's our thought process. And we always want to have Longrow Peated on the shelf, but we always want to have a cask strength version. And I think right now the only cask strength version was that Longrow Red. I think it would be then the 18 and the 21 were the next in line, but they were all at 46%. So I should say as well, it's going to be called Longrow 100 Proof in the UK and the rest of the world, but in the US, it's going to be called Longrow 114 Proof, I'm pretty sure, as we've been discussing in the office, because their 100 proof is like 50% ABV. 100 proof for us is 57.14. So there you go. Hopefully people are enjoying that. Sorry, Mel, I just want to just answer Dennis's question here, Dennis from Mondon. To increase the production, is it just increasing shifts, or does it also involve reducing fermentation, etc.? Essentially, I'm assuming Dennis is alluding to sort of playing around with the recipe. I can confirm, no, it's not playing around with the recipe or reducing fermentations or taking shortcuts. It's essentially a case of hiring more people as a brainwave. But basically, before 2018, the distilling team were the same team as the malting team. There was a lot of overlap there. You can't have two people in the same, or you can't have one person in the same place, or two different places, sorry, I should say. So it was a case of hiring a dedicated distilling team, dedicated malting team, or hiring more people to have a dedicated distilling job, dedicated malting job, warehousing as well, and yard work, bottling, so that everyone had their own place, and it was increasing the shifts and employing more people to produce more whiskey, just like that. No shortcuts, no computers, no automation, just more people buzzing around Springbank Distillery in Kilkerran. So,
I mean, talking about the number of employees, I think I'm right in saying about 5 years ago it was maybe 50 employees, and then now we're over 100 employees. So for a town with a population of 6,000 people, it's no surprise to hear the distillery and Janie Mitchell, that includes obviously Kilkerran and William Cadenhead, is actually the largest private employer in the Wee so it really helps to contribute to life in Campbelltown. I'm sure many of you have come down and visited us and really enjoyed yourselves.
Yeah. Apart from that, Mel, have you got anything else to speak about? I don't see many more questions. If there's any more questions before we head off, guys, feel free to ask them quickly. I think it's been a great wee evening. We've had lots of comments. You can see that the comment section going all the time. Some absolutely fantastic whiskies, an absolute stellar lineup. As I talked about, there'll be 2 more releases. We've just done the August release, which included the Springbank 18-year-old, the Springbank 21, there was a Kilkerran 16. I'm assuming those 3 will probably be on the next tasting pack release. Mm-hmm. And then later into the year, we're going to have the 10-year-old Sherry Wood series, the Amontillado.
Longrow 18.
Longrow 18.
And then the Hazelburn Sherry.
Yeah, exactly. So next tasting pack's going to be absolutely awesome as well. But yeah, apart from that, I think that's time to hit an end on the tasting, or hit pause on the tasting. And thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah,
okay.
But say slange.
Slange. Cheers.